Hi, folks. Great to be with you. This is the CBC Barbara from Atrium, where tonight we're holding our CBC ASKS program and basically about how we do the news. You know, how do we decide what to cover, how we're going to cover it, what makes the news, what doesn't make the news? How do we make those decisions? And we're going to do this by listening to your questions, whether you're here in the audience or you're out on social. I want to give some instructions for those on social. The audience already knows how it'll be able to put in its questions for us tonight. We're live on Facebook. Send us your questions by writing them in the comment section on Facebook, okay? We're also on YouTube. Tweet us using the hashtag CBC ASKS. It's an original idea for a program called CBC ASKS. Remember to give us your name. It's important. We want to hear your name when you send in your questions. Once again, we're calling this CBC ASKS, so we want you, obviously, to ask us. And to help answer these questions, 5 of our top journalists. I'm going to ask them to come out on the stage now. I'm sure you know who they all are, but I will let you know as well at the same time. And here they come, starting with senior correspondent Adrienne Arsenault. Our Washington correspondent, Paul Hunter. And the host of Power and Politics, Rosemary Barton. And the host of, our new host of Cross Country Checkup, Duncan McCue. And finally, senior investigative reporter, Diana Swain. We got a range of experience here from literally across the country and around the world. So hopefully we'll be able to take a run at answering your questions. I'm going to start by asking the first one, then after that it's up to all of you. I'm going to ask it of Paul Hunter. As I said, he's in our Washington bureau. He's covering the U.S. election. So give us the answer to that easy question. How do you cover Donald Trump?
Oh man, where to begin? You know, it usually begins with the customs officer, and they'll ask the same thing. And then it's the taxi cab, the driver on the way down. People stop on the street. I had 2, last time I was here, I was filling in for you last Christmas, and I was walking along Dundas Street, and 2 Metro police officers came up, and they said, "What's going on with Donald Trump? Tell me he's not going to be elected. It's weird." You know, I was at a Trump rally, I don't know, I guess in the springtime. And they are what you see. It's you know, the deplorables and all the people, and it's like a rock concert. It's a bizarre experience. He is up there like a rock singer, and he'll say, what am I gonna do? And they all shout out, "Build a wall." And you're looking at this and you say, what to make of this, right? I mean, when we cover him, we're not on his plane, right? We don't cover the U.S. political story the way we cover the story in Ottawa. In Ottawa, it's a smaller story relative to the U.S., but you're closer to it. You're shoulder to shoulder, first name basis with these people, right? And it's a bigger story down there, but you're further away from it. So what can we do? Well, you know, for Trump, we thought, we asked the same question of ourselves that the taxi driver asks and the customs officer, who is this guy and why do people back him? And so we went to talk not to the deplorables, not to people that are frothing at the mouth, that are kind of easy to find, but reasonable people who have thought about this and have considered why they want to back this guy in the face of what the rest of the country thinks is insanity. And man, was it interesting, because they really want to believe what he says. And they made their points to us. I mean, in our piece, Bikers for Trump, these were bikers, but they were reasonable bikers who had thought about this. And They want to believe that he is the answer to their problems. And man, do they believe that Hillary Clinton is not. And they're willing to put up with all his foibles. Oh, he'll be fine. It's better than that. And it was remarkable because you think that's why we've got a contest going on. And it really made me realize that he's not a joke candidate. There are a lot of Americans who feel that way, and their vote counts just as much as the rest of them. And it was really, I thought, eye-opening. And that's the kind of story we want to put on the National, because it's take a step back. What do Americans think about this? And man, are Americans good talkers, and they're willing to give you their opinions every single time. It's interesting.
That's great. Paul's done some great work traveling around. The easy way to cover these campaigns is to just stick with the candidate or do them just from Washington. Paul's managed to get out across the country and do exactly that kind of journalism, was trying to get behind the story. A question from the audience. Hillary's with somebody right there. Can we hear your name there, ma'am?
Hi, I'm Sean O'Flaherty. My question is for Peter Mansbridge. So
He's not here tonight.
He's not here tonight. Oh, well, goodbye.
Sorry.
So you've had a long and exciting career. What was the most challenging story that you've covered in that career, and why was it the most challenging?
Yeah, it's not quite over yet.
To date.
No, I haven't.
To date.
I haven't. I've been extremely lucky. But the luckiest part of my job is that I get to work with people like this, which makes the challenge that much easier. It's never simple. There's always a challenge involved in journalism and in telling stories. But when you're working with great journalists in the field and working with great journalists who are here in the building, both who help you with the putting together the newscast, not only from the written end, but also from the production end. But I guess in a word, the most challenging, because I think for all of us who were involved in it, was probably that 9/11 day. You know, there was so much happening. It was so tragic. It was, it touched so many different emotions, and trying to follow the puck on the story and understand what was happening and why it was happening was an enormous challenge for all of us. Thank you for the question. Back here.
Hi, my name's Rachel Harris, and my question's for Adrienne. So you're often on the ground, often if there's a terrorist attack or natural disaster, and how do you balance the entertainment value of a story and the news value of a story when you're covering it?
Sorry, the entertainment value?
So
And the news value. How do you balance
so
the two?
what grabs headlines and what people want to see and their gut reaction, but how do you balance that in the actual news of the story itself?
Yeah, it's hard, because horrible things happen, and there are horrible pictures that you can't turn away from that are associated with it. And these are the things that, sometimes, particularly in the American networks, you'll see the teaser reels come up, and there's the thumping music and this, building falling down and people crying. And I think, that's difficult because it draws people in. People want to see those stories. But, part of being on the ground, and we all do it, we've all done it, is you don't see that. You don't see sort of the presentation of that because it's right in front of you. You tend not to see, you watch it differently because you're smelling it, and you're hearing it, and you're tasting the dust. And I don't think the word entertainment kind of ever comes into your mind in those moments. Those stories are never about the buildings. They're about the people who are living on the third floor of those buildings. And I think part of what we do is that it's in our DNA to go find out about the people on the third floor. This isn't a great answer, but because it's a really good question, I sort of want to think about it. But I guess the bottom line is for us is that we don't see it, even though we're with the camera, we don't see it through the lens of a camera. We see it through our own eyes, and you feel it very differently.
It is a great question, because in a general way, in terms of putting together a news program, you're constantly trying to determine, what is news? Is news what some people find entertaining, or, the sort of water cooler type stories, or is news what's important for you to need to know? And then trying to find the right balance of that over the length of the program. So there's two ways of looking at that question. One is on the individual item, and one is on the bigger picture in terms of the newscast itself. Another question right here.
Hi, my name's Nicole, and my question is for Diana, Adrienne, and Rosemary. I was just wondering, my question is, what kind of experiences and challenges have you all faced as women in journalism?
I would say that the greatest challenges for me as a woman in this field were at the beginning of my career, when I think there was a lesser understanding out there in society generally that, as a woman, as a man, as journalists, that's what we want to be known as a journalist and not by gender. And there were certainly some challenges. I've talked before about I had a boss who, referred to myself and another reporter by our physical attributes as he saw them. That was my first job. And I remember at the time thinking, frankly, sort of suck it up, Swain. Show that you're tough, that, you're not easily thrown, you can kind of hang with the guys in the newsroom. And I see that so differently now. And I would certainly speak to younger women coming into journalism now and say, don't put up with it. It's not a reasonable expectation. Your reasonable expectation is to be treated equally. It's easier now, I think. I hope so. Or maybe I'm just less patient with that now. I wouldn't put up with it. But, it's changed. It's certainly changed in the 30 years I've been at this.
Rosie?
Yeah, Parliament Hill is a place where it was long mostly men, right? And whether it be MPs or journalists, and it has evolved just over my 10 years there. There's a lot more women there, so it makes it a lot easier because it's just more open. I think the place for me where being a woman is certainly different is on social media. There are lots of comments every day about how I look, what I'm wearing, what people think of what I look. Some of them are nice and some of them are really horrible. I don't know if Paul gets lots of comments about how he looks. I would guess probably not as much. So I think that that's still something that has to be worked on. I don't have a problem with it because I'm a public person. I get it. But it is still one of the things out there that I don't think is equal across the board. Just because I'm a woman doesn't mean you get to say nasty things about me on Twitter or whatever else. So that's the hurdle, I would say, that still has to be overcome.
It's funny, just before Adrienne, to answer the question,
Yeah,
no.
yeah.
But
What's
your experience,
zero
Paul, as a woman?
times.
Zero.
Has that zero.
Yeah.
Nice tie is about as far as it goes. And I don't know if even that's ever, I'd not thought of that before. It's interesting.
My mom is on the phone after every piece and saying, I don't know about that
Well, that's
shirt."
believable.
Yeah, I don't know.
Adrienne?
Well, they're all very thoughtful because when you first said that, the first thing I thought of, challenge being a woman is going to the bathroom in the desert. That was where there's no tree to hide behind. There are real world challenges you face, everybody faces. Sometimes it's an advantage to be 5'3" and a woman in a place where, sometimes people have looked at that and thought, that little thing can't possibly be a threat. I'll talk to her, which are fantastic days. Those are my favorite days when something, there, come over here, dear, I'll talk to you. I love those days. So it can be difficult, but it can also be an incredible advantage. Here on the social media, I was looking at some of the reaction to this event, which is a great event. I don't know if I can say this, but there was one person who talked about, oh, great, we get to see the cheap whores or something like that, which, that's a great day. We get those probably every single day. But I also, like Diana, come from the suck it up, Swain generation, where we've heard all sorts of things in all sorts of newsrooms, and at some point you learn to give as good as you get. And it's a survival technique that makes sometimes the bullies go away. But it's absolutely not acceptable when you see the younger generation who have grown up with a very different sensibility. And, when we talk about sucking it up, sometimes they look at us like we're crazy.
Let me give you the perspective of somebody who grew up with the older generation on this issue in a way. When I started 48 years ago, in my first newsroom was a Churchill, very small newsroom, but then I moved to Winnipeg in the newsroom that Diana would eventually come into and start to make a name for herself in the CBC. But when I was first got there in 1971, there was only one woman in the whole newsroom, television, radio, everyone. And that woman answered the phones and got coffee in the morning. And until the day when somebody went up and asked her to get her coffee, and she looked at him and said, "Get your own damn coffee." And a year after that, she was the assignment editor in the Winnipeg newsroom. As the movement finally began, in the first area of kind of diversity within the operation. And look at it today, when, in newsrooms across the country, and especially in our bureaus around the world, where the dominant figures of our foreign corresponding in some of the most difficult places in the world are the Nola Ayeds, the Adrienne Arsenaults, and the Susan Ormistons, and the list goes on. It's incredibly impressive, the changes that have been made just in my short span here at the CBC, so it's great. Let me go to a question off social here. And it came into this, is this a Facebook question or okay, Facebook Live question. Michelle Holdway asks this, and Duncan, I'm gonna get you to handle this one. How do you think social media comments and critiques have changed your personal news reporting, or had it remained the same regardless of public interaction in this new medium?
I think they've been a game changer in terms of the way that we respond as media. I think we're we've always been conscious, the CBC and I think other media outlets, of our audiences. So letters to the editor, and back in the day in the National, we used to run comments at the end of the show. We've always been very conscious of our audience and how they're perceiving our news. But now, I mean, it's a 24/7 commentary holding us accountable for what we're putting out there. And I think that is changing both the speed of the way that we're approaching news, because the audiences are expecting us to be on top of items and giving us instantaneous reaction, like we're doing Facebook Live right now. We're getting feedback right now. Someone is perhaps critiquing my answer. And it's happening in real time. So that has amped up, I think, the speed that all of us are having to respond. With Rosie's show, there's a constant stream of commentary which she's having to incorporate into that show, and we're making it part of our show. With Cross Country Checkup, we're doing our best to try to bring that social media conversation in. I mean, the Cross Country Checkup was started because we wanted to give Canadians a voice in the 60s. And radio was the way to do that with a phone-in show. It's a reasonable question to be asked, why do we have a phone-in show anymore when people are commenting 24/7? But we're now trying to bring that social media voice into our program, and I think we're all doing that, is really incorporating audience suggestions into our real-life programming. And they are holding us to account in a way that is very, very new.
Well, you're making it sound all very positive. A lot of it is, but there's a lot of negative on this side too. I mean, you've had to deal with hate stuff.
Yes.
And online as well.
I wouldn't say that personally. I maintain a fairly active Twitter presence. I haven't dealt with personally many attacks. I do get a lot of critiques of my journalism, and I do my best to try to respond if it's a critique of the journalism as opposed to the shirt that I'm wearing that particular day, which I don't get very often either, Rosie. But certainly in terms of Indigenous issues, yes, there has been all kinds of negative viewpoints and frankly racism that's expressed on Twitter, and that's a challenge to deal with as a journalist.
But you know what, I would add that while we've all dealt with the negative side of social media, and it's getting its appropriate attention now, I think, whether it's Twitter or other social media apps, having to kind of confront what they're allowing to happen. The other side of that is that pre-social media, I think we didn't have as much kind of one-on-one engagement with the people who were watching or listening to what we were doing. If someone wanted to tell me what they thought of my journalism, they had to pick up the phone. Not everyone's comfortable doing that, actually, or they had to write you a letter. And by the time you got the letter, you were on to something else. Now people can really engage with you and tell you what they think of the story, and it gives you a chance to respond back. And I would say I've probably gotten some pretty meaningful tips on stories from the engagement that I've had on social media. People see an initial story and then they go, oh, you know what you really need to look at is this. And it leads you to the next step of the journalism. So it cuts both ways. Some of it is just, you just wish it wasn't a part of the reality of it. And on the other side of it, it can be incredibly useful as a journalist.
Can I say one?
Yeah, sure you can.
Just because of the way my show, in case you haven't seen it before, we do put tweets on the screen as well, and I try and refer to tweets during the show if I can. I find that the best thing about social media is because I live in Ottawa, and I've lived in other places in the country, but you tend to, you get a little hyper-focused. We call it the Ottawa bubble. Sometimes what the tweets and other emails or Facebook or whatever show me is they remind me what's happening in other places in the country. So I sometimes use it as, oh wait, people in BC care more about this, or people in Alberta want to remind me about this when I'm talking about pipelines. So for me, it sort of gives me an access to the rest of the country that maybe I wouldn't get otherwise. So there's a downside, but that to me is the best part of it, is that people can reach out and remind me of things that are important to them in places where I may not be all the time.
Every once in a while, one of the ways I respond when I get commentary coming in on social media is the same way I used to get when it was in snail mail, is I'll find out the person's phone number and I'll call them and talk to them, and it's great. I mean, first of all, we all know, there can be confusion online about people's meanings and the way you read stuff online, but it also, it gives them a much better chance to really
But what do they do when you say it's Peter Mansbridge?
I was just going to ask that.
They don't believe you.
They just say, I really didn't mean that. No, they get right to it. Let's go to another one. This is from YouTube, and it's for Paul. And this is the perfect person to ask this, because he's had to deal with some really difficult situations. How do you guys deal with tragedies? Can you shut your mind off after work? Chris Versteeg sent that.
Wow, that is a good question. And in a way, the answer harkens back to kind of a version of the question about entertainment, too. And it made me think about drawing the line between exploiting or fear of exploiting misery for the sake of a good picture or some strong emotion, which is what we strive for in storytelling, and which made me think of Haiti. And among the many things there was somebody was alive in the rubble several days afterward, and that we stumbled across downtown, and there was a crowd around the area where they were trying to dig this woman out. And wow, what great TV this is going to be. And then, well, we don't belong here, and you think, I don't want to exploit, like, this is awful. And then people, they saw we were there, and they turned and they said, come in and show the world what's going on here. This is important. It's important that the world see what is happening because we need help. And so you think you're doing some good with this. And I find that kind of permeates coverage in Newtown after the massacre, in Boston after the bombings, in Haiti, in Japan, wherever you go. If you understand and believe that your story is getting out and doing some good, then it allows you to keep asking permission to go in and meet people in terrible circumstances. At the end of the day, on every day I'm in these places, and I did this in Gaza during the war a couple of years ago, and in Haiti, and in all these places, I'll sit in a room and be quiet for 20 minutes and think about the day and think about what is happening out there, and just let it sit, and then go to sleep, and then wake up and go back out again the next day. And that's how I deal with it. But I don't know if it's the right way, because you just hope that over time you're not going to become, A, desensitized to this stuff, or be adversely affected by it, which is always a risk.
I know Adrienne wants to talk about this for a moment as well. I should also say that the CBC, as it concerns itself about its employees who we send into difficult situations, whether they be war zones or disaster areas, we prepare them by sending them on special courses. And they're also, the corporation is also very concerned once they come back on how they kind of basically recover in terms of what they've seen and how it impacts them. And so that kind of help is kind of available at both ends of these stories. It's a very important contribution on the part of the corporation itself. Adrienne, you have a story on this too.
I was going to say, I thought that the question was kind of interesting about how do you sort of turn it off at the end of the night. And I think that actually might be dangerous. I think part of what happens when you go cover, as everybody knows, when you go cover a tragedy is that you allow yourself to be an observer, but smell it and hear it and taste the dust and watch what's happening. And a form of coping with it is expressing yourself in your story and allowing yourself to understand the meaning of what it is for, the oldest person in a family. I'm thinking about the tsunami, and I know you were there too in Sri Lanka. I met an elderly woman who was the last one left in her family and did not understand why her children died, why her grandchildren died. She was all by herself, and she was with a group of kids who were being, taught art therapy to draw their grief. And she asked for a crayon and a piece of paper that she could draw it too. Those people get under your skin, and I hope they stay there forever because it allows you to sort of continue to sort of connect with them as people. I would be terrified if we turned it off at night. I don't want to be that person who can turn it on and turn it off. But it's interesting to hear what you say because I think we all have a process, and I didn't know that was yours. For me, I have this weird conversation with the stories. Like when I come home, a plane is very helpful. It is, I'm going to sound crazy here, but I always have a bag of clothes, clean clothes that haven't touched anything where I was. I put it in a Ziploc bag. So it's an act of physically putting on a new pair of pants or a new shirt. And then I get on the plane, and that's a process. And then I sort of have this relationship with my stories for a little while. They can follow me and tap me on the shoulder for a little time and remind me of them. But at some point, I almost will stop and say, all right, you've had your time, go. And then you move on. It's weird, but it seems to work.
If I could just say one more thing quickly. And I wasn't shutting it down, but it was an interesting process. I didn't know what to do. And it was my birthday, as it turns out. And I thought, this is my birthday. And I just seen like bodies on fire downtown, right? And I sat there, and it was dark because there was no electricity in Port-au-Prince. And there were people wandering in the streets singing religious hymns. And you could hear it kind of wafting in. And it was beautiful. Amid all of this, and you're thinking, in a way, the world is going to be okay because they're strong enough and resilient enough to be doing that on this night. And so you are privileged to be in a place like that where you can be inspired, I think, by people in such circumstances, and that helps you survive, I think.
All right, let's move back on to questions from the audience, and this gentleman has one right here.
Hello, my name is Lee Bursey. I'm a local cable access talk show host and a city councillor in my community. And it's just outside of the Ottawa bubble in Brockville, Ontario. My question is about political neutrality. Recognizing that we live in a generation of politicians and politicos who many times have to check their bias. I'm just curious how you check yours and avoid political bias when people are often attacking public institutions like the CBC?
We'll answer that question. I want to know how you do it. You're a city councillor and a talk show host.
Yes, and it's challenging even in a community of 22,000.
Okay, I'm going to ask Rosie to deal with this one.
Okay, well, here's the short answer. I don't think I lean anyway. That's the first thing. I understand politics and I understand politicians and I get why they're doing it, but I have no desire to be part of that. I like to watch what they're doing and make sure that they're explaining why they're doing the right thing. or why they think they're doing the right thing, and have them defend their decisions. A good gauge for me about when I know I'm doing okay is at the end of the day, if everyone that I've interviewed on MPs panels or whatever, either they're all happy or they're all really pissed off with me equally. And I don't think that I've upset them so much that they refuse to come back or don't want to talk to me or feel like they're not getting a fair shake. The other thing I do is try and be really careful with time, right? Even if it's a live show or a live interview, I try and make sure that everybody gets about the same time, that everybody gets a chance to make their point, that everybody gets fact-checked in the same way. So I try and do that because I want everyone to really believe and know that I don't have a position. My position is to get the best answer for all of you. That's what I'm the defender of, the truth and information. I'm not a defender of the policies or the interests of the politicians. You probably have lots to say on that, too.
Well, here's what I'll say, because there's a lot of questions coming in on social media, Facebook Live, especially, where they're saying CBC's got a liberal bias. Now, you know, it reminds me of when the Conservatives were in power. We used to get a lot of stuff, oh, CBC's got a conservative bias. First of all, you know, for those of us who work here, the whole notion of that is crazy. And I'll tell you why. We have one person doesn't make the decisions around here about what's on the news, and one person doesn't make the decision about what's said in a report. There is a very stringent editorial process that goes on here, first in the development of stories throughout the day, what we're doing, how we're doing it. And that involves people, like, say, on national political stories in both Ottawa and in Toronto, people of varying backgrounds from different parts of the country who weigh in on their attitudes towards a story, whether it's worth it or not. The sense that we're somehow sitting around there going, okay, how can we, you know, slant the news to favor whatever party? It's just crazy. It doesn't work that way. That's not how a real newsroom operates. And we consider ourselves to have a real newsroom with senior editors who work very hard at trying to put forward a program each night that reflects the country, that reflects the diversity of the country, reflects the different arguments that are going on around public policy all the time. So, you know, we hear you when you say this, but that's our answer. The answer that Rosie gives you as a person who's, you know, up and in the focus of the camera and the eye every day on political shows. And what I'm giving you as well is a kind of broader sense of how the decisions are made around here on a variety of different stories. Another question. Thank you for that one. Good luck on that open line show area.
Hi.
Yes. Yep.
My name's Claire Bonnyman. And my question is really for everyone, although I'll point it towards Duncan. CBC is known for high caliber international coverage, but what plans and efforts and work is in place to increase not only the quantity but also the quality of coverage when it comes to Canada, especially when it relates to Northern and Indigenous communities?
It's a great question. And I know I've heard Adrienne say that she wishes that we could cover international affairs better. I think we all wish that we could do a fantastic job covering international affairs. From my own perspective, I have heard it said that for some reporters, that going to First Nation communities is like going to another country. There are an awful lot of mainstream media, unfortunately, who have not had that opportunity to go to a First Nations community until they're assigned to go there in a news story, and they're expected to have it on the news that night. And so we need to, at times, treat our coverage of First Nation communities with the same amount of resources that we use to staff our international coverage. When we went to cover La Loche, for example, and that incredibly tragic, really emotional community that was struggling with a loss, all of the media were behind the 8 ball simply because of the distance that we had to travel to get there. It was a full day's journey just to get to La Loche and then to try to get our stories out. We've had the same problem when we go to Attawapaskat or many other communities that we have to go to in the north. It requires an awful lot of resources to cover our First Nations and our northern communities properly. And so media organizations, CBC included, need to make those tough decisions about the costs in our newsroom when we've all got shrinking budgets, that this is an important story that needs to be told in Canada and that we need to resource it properly. I do like to say that with the creation of CBC Indigenous, that is starting to change at the CBC in a way that I am really proud of. And I am seeing stories covered in our First Nation communities with the same, the emphasis is being put on them in a way that I haven't seen before in the past, and we're treating that coverage really important.
You know, I would just jump in to say that I know there are some young people in the audience too who I assume are journalism students who are, you know, kind of figuring out their next path. And, you know, as I look back on my own career, and I'm sure, Peter, you may have some thoughts on this as well, for a significant part of my career, I lived and worked in Winnipeg. And for a big chunk of that time, working for the National, I covered both Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And together, there's the largest urban Indigenous population in the country, but also, you know, a pretty thriving Indigenous community in the northern part of both provinces. And my first real exposure, quite honestly, to different communities was as a journalist. But over the many years that I was there, it developed my understanding of Canada. And, you know, I hear journalists talking about, you know, I've worked in this part of the country or that part of the country. If you're a young journalist looking for some advice about what to do, see the country. That's not just east to west, that's north. Get to know your country if you really want to be in a meaningful position at some point in your career to tell people about it. You have to go there. And that means more than dropping in for a couple of hours to tell a story. You know, if you have an opportunity to just go without being assigned, go and see your country because it's more than, you know, an hour north of every major city.
I will only add that I started in northern Manitoba, in Churchill, Manitoba, where a lot of these issues were on the table every day in terms of coverage. And the only thing that frustrates me nearly a half a century later is we're still asking the same questions of Indigenous leaders and federal and provincial government leaders about trying to resolve some of these issues that confront Indigenous populations, that we're still asking the same questions, still in many cases getting the kind of answers that don't end up in solving the problem. I will just add one thing in terms of our coverage because it's important and you know, and Duncan was a part of it and probably shy to in a way brag about it. The CBC committed to investigating the whole issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women and children. And the award-winning journalism that was done over what, a couple of years, the last couple of years, is something that we're extremely proud of and something that we feel has made a difference. And that's what you're talking about, is journalism that makes a difference. And you know, there's more of that to be done, as both Duncan and you say. We have to be able to use what resources we do have to ensure that we do more of exactly that. Where's Katie? Right here. Yes, sir.
All right, so it's Mitch Stark, Humber College journalism student. So my question is for all of you, and I'm gonna let you decide who you think can answer it best. So what is your most valuable life lesson as a human being in your career as a journalist?
That's a great question. Our most important life lesson in our careers as journalists. Who wants to take this?
Can I jump in? And it's a fantastic question because I often wonder where, you know, we can get the skills at journalism school. I teach at the UBC Graduate School of Journalism, and we teach, you know, all the skills of how to white balance your camera and how to write an inverted pyramid lead, all those kinds of things. But some of the best things that journalists bring to the table are the natural skills of how they were raised and where they come from. And I have to say that for me, I think maybe one of the most important values that I feel I try to bring to my journalism every day is respect. And when I do cross-country checkup, I try to bring it to every 2-hour show, that I respect each and every one of those callers that's calling from Corner Brook or from Abbotsford, that I respect that they're sharing their story with me. And it's a privilege for me to hear that story. When I'm covering the national and doing stories on the national, I try to bring that respect that was taught to me, frankly, by elders, about the way that I should conduct myself in this world with respect, and bring that to the land and to bring that to the people that I engage with, my family and my community. And I try to bring that into my journalism and it really, create that relationship with the story subject.
That relationship is critical. I mean, you've got to earn that respect to get people to talk to you. It's often not easy. Do you want to add to this, Adrienne?
Sure. I was going to say that I think one of the things that I've learned is that you just don't know. You don't know what people are going through. Whatever knowledge you think you bring, you don't really know. And it's your job to keep your eyes wide open and your ears wide open, and, park your judgments at the door and just listen to these people. And, when I came back to live in Canada after living overseas for so long, I sort of made myself a promise that I would try to be a foreign correspondent in my own land. So in other words, I would look at everything like an outsider. I would always try to be the outsider, asking the what's with that question, not sort of accepting what you see as normal, always asking. And I try to sort of extend that. It's not always easy, but I try to kind of extend that into other parts of my life to just say, you just don't know what people are going through. Listen to them. Just take the time to hear them out.
Hillary has got some guests here.
Hello, my name is Stephen Boyles. I'm also here from Humber with the radio broadcast program. I was wondering, my question's for you, Peter, what advice you might offer with 48 years of experience to somebody trying to break into news broadcast?
Right. Okay, we've probably all got a line on that because it's the most common asked question of us by journalism students who are hoping to break into the business. What I usually say is, think big, but be prepared to start small. And it's in a way what Diana was saying. You're not going to get my job when you come out of school. Well, you might actually. It is open in a few months. But the odds are not good, right? You're going to have to work your way there.
It's coming open soon, though.
Yes. That's enough from you, Hunter. But, get out there. There's a big world in this country. And if you want to be a storyteller of developments in news, then you on a national level, you got to understand the country. And you don't understand it from inside the 401. You got to get out there. And it's a tough time. It's, when I started, I started in Churchill, Manitoba. There was literally nobody for the job that was open. So they came and grabbed me. I was loading bags at an airport, and somebody heard my voice to offer me a job, and that's where it all started. But for that same job today, there'd be 200 of you, right, lined up for that job. So but there are opportunities out there. So, think big. That's good. You want to have ambition and drive to head towards a target. But be prepared to start small and don't take no for an answer. Knock on a lot of doors. Get out there. Best thing you can pick up at Humber and wherever else you may be, practicing journalism in some small way, is to learn how to tell a story. That's what journalism's about. You're looking at some of the best storytellers we have on this panel. And they've made their mark because they know how to tell a story. They know how to gain your attention, grip it, and make you listen and watch and read online. So that'd be my sort of short form. Rosie?
Exactly. That's what I always say. Go anywhere. Go where the job is. I get everyone wants to work in Toronto or Vancouver. They want to, be Peter, but it doesn't work that way. Journalism is one of those places where you do have to sort of earn your stripes, go up the ladder a little bit. My first job was in Quebec City. It was a part-time researcher job. I could barely pay my student loans back, and I was living in a room in someone's house. That turned into a reporter job, that turned into something else, it just goes that way. So you have to be willing to go to places where you wouldn't think the stories are, where maybe not everybody wants to go, and then work really hard. That's the other thing I would say, that I always say to journalism students, this is more than a job. This is a whole way of life. You are always watching for stories, you're always learning, you're always reading, you're always asking questions. And if you like it, if you like all those things, it's gonna work out.
100%. I mean, it's so true. And you know, like what Diana was saying earlier, you'll learn about the country. And if you're going to report to the country, if you're going to be a network journalist, you better know the country, because that's who's going to be watching your stuff. Number two, start at a small place. You know, I've preached this from the get-go, because you know what? As you're learning how to tell a story, man, you can be terrible at it. and you'll still be allowed back in the door the next day, and you'll get a little bit better, right? And you'll try again, and you'll learn what went wrong with that. Why didn't that resonate? Why wasn't that good? Well, you get better and you get better. And I worked in Saskatoon. I worked in Wingham, Ontario, outside CBC. Before I went to Saskatoon for CBC, I worked in Calgary, Toronto, Ottawa, Washington, London a little bit. You learn about London, England, but for the rest of them, it's like you learn about the country, right? And these are the people you're talking to. And go anywhere. Learn how to tell stories, but it takes, to learn, you gotta go, and to learn about the country, and to learn how to tell stories, you gotta do it again and again and again and again and get better every single time. To this day, I second guess myself every single story I put together. How could I have done that better? And it's a lifelong or career-long process.
Can I say something that will embarrass Paul?
If it's very quick.
Because Paul and I...
Oh, no, if it's gonna embarrass him, take your time.
Oh, all right. And it might embarrass Adrienne too. But when I started at the Bureau, Paul was still in Ottawa, and there wasn't really room for me. It was a lot of big stars, and I was just sort of sitting there trying to figure things out. So you know what I did for months on end is I would print off Paul's scripts every night that he would write for the National, and often Adrienne's as well, and I would study them. I would look at them, and I would learn how they were writing things. So that's the other way. Just watch some of these people and what they're doing. Like, learn from them. Paul can send you his scripts every night if you want. You can study them.
You know that I write both of their stuff.
Well then.
I want, Katie, will you bring a mic over to Jennifer and Steve's area here? Because we've been, one of the constants through this evening already on social media, whether it's on Twitter or on Facebook, and also online, are questions about the decision that the CBC has made on comments and closing off comments in certain areas. And it's a hot topic, as we know, not just tonight, but we've seen responses on both sides of this issue. But Jennifer, perhaps you can give the thinking on the decision we've made.
Sure. Maybe I'll start by saying CBC News has remained committed to keeping comments on stories, while many news organizations have chosen to turn them off. And we do that because, one, we know that people want to engage with our content. We have a huge online community who participates in commenting, and we know that people who don't also like to read the comments. That adds value to their experience of stories. But we also have an obligation. We have legal obligations around commenting. We have an obligation around civil discourse. And that's why we moderate comments. We've been evolving our approach to how we do that. We've played with not moderating and reactive moderating, and moderating to make sure that the level of discourse is civil. There have been situations around Indigenous stories and other kinds of stories where we were having to remove so much volume of commenting that we've turned comments off. In other cases, the sheer volume of activity in terms of our commenting communities has necessitated financially for us to limit the amount of comments we open on certain stories. Huge costs to moderation, which is why a lot of news organizations have gotten out of it. So that's the headline. But we're committed to being there, and we're committed to actually, trying different kinds of things, and actually like Facebook Live, having our journalists and our producers participate in conversations with audiences, and you only see more of that. And I'll throw it to Steve, but just to the young journalists, we will be this April opening a new radio station in London, Ontario. So just a headline on that.
Everything Jen said just then was perfect, so I don't need to say too much. But for the past 20 years, there was an assumption that news organizations would publish a story, and that story would immediately get comments. And we made the decision that at some point you just have to say we want good comments, and that means moderating comments. And that means, as Jen said, a large volume of people looking at a large volume of things. So the sort of editorial decision that goes into it is this a story that can legally receive comments? Are we going to let people say bad things about people who may have been charged with a crime, or people who we don't want to identify because of a publication ban? You open the comments, someone could do that. And then political stories can be tricky as well, because you don't want to just open it up to a partisan forum where it's going to be overwhelmed with people just saying, your guy's a loser, and there's not a lot of value there. So we look for opportunities to introduce comments on stories, several a day, that will actually build an interesting conversation and not just give people a place to yell and scream at each other, because that's what Twitter's for.
And Steve used to be at Twitter, so that's okay. We've only got a couple of minutes left. I want to try and get two question areas in, one from social and one from here in the room. Here's the Twitter question from Amy Cummings. You have traveled around the world working. Where have you been that you would just like to explore? I'll ask Adrienne to answer that. I'll just say that one of the perils of working as a journalist traveling the world is, you're so locked onto the story you're doing. You're often lucky after you've been out shooting all day to ever get outside of the edit suite after that to, enjoy, if that's the case, the surroundings in which you are at. But if there was one place, of the places you've been, where would it be?
Can I have more than one?
We don't have time.
Rats. You know what? I would say Liberia, because when I was in Liberia, it was to cover Ebola. That's no way to see a country. The distance we'd have to keep would be like for me to Diana. Places were locked off. People were not well. They were not comfortable. They were terrified. And yet you see the potential in this country, and you see what it's come through after, the horrors of the violence in Liberia, and you know that they are making their way back slowly, and they need so much more help, and yet you just can't get there. You just can't get there. So I would dearly love to go back, but I'd say the same for Burma. I'd say the same for Pakistan. This is the disease of covering stories internationally, is that we go into places where some people are leaving, and we spend a fair amount of time there, or not very much time, and then we bug out. And you just, you're sort of like hands are on the window sometimes thinking, will I ever get to see this place again, and will I ever get to see it like a human? But you know what? It's the disease of the job, because we're in love with it.
Exactly. And we are in love with it. It's a great job. Right over here, this will be our last question.
Hello, my name's Catherine Kelly. I'm a journalism student from Carleton. I'd like to open up this question to all the panelists. What separates a good journalist from a great one?
Wow. Well, you're looking at a number of great journalists up here, so let's see if there's I don't think there's an easy answer to this question. I have a thought, which I'll give at the end of all this, but if we do it, quickly, because they're telling me, like you've got 2 minutes total. Rosie.
Yeah, that's a really hard question, so good for you. You're on your way to being a great journalist. Perseverance, which sometimes looks like stubbornness when I do it, but never stopping when you think there's more to something. Always asking questions, even when it's hard.
Paul?
Wow. Take the job really seriously. Don't take yourself too seriously. Be a human being, have fun. notwithstanding where you might end up. But take the craft seriously, but just be yourself. Be a human being.
Sometimes tell yourself that good enough is not actually good enough, and that there's no such thing as phoning it in, I think.
Duncan.
I'm with Rosie. I started out in the CBC Vancouver newsroom and watching Eve Savory and Terry Molesky. It was all about perseverance, and they just would not stop. When they wanted an answer, they just kept at it. When they were trying to get to the heart of the story, if it was Eve Savory with a science story, for example, just digging all the time and always being curious.
Diana.
I would say understand what your job is. You know, we call ourselves reporters. It's the noun, but we're actually doing the action. We're reporting back to people at the end of the day. While people are busy living their lives, going to school, doing their jobs, we're kind of their servants. You know, can you please, Diana, Adrienne, Paul, so on, tell me what happened while I was busy with my life so I can check in at the end of the day and be informed about my world. We are reporting back to you. That makes us accountable to you. If you lose sight of that, you're not really fulfilling your job.
I'd just add, those are all great answers to this question, but I have found over time watching our journalists and that separation, sometimes a very fine line between a really good reporter and a really great reporter, is in their ability to tell a story well. And it usually comes down to the writing. And the writing is different depending on which medium you're in. If you're in a medium like Duncan is now, of radio, where it's all about listening, or if you're online, if you're in an online situation, it's about how you can lift that story off the page and really make people fascinated and interested in the story you have to tell. And finally, in television, often the challenge in the writing is not to overwrite. You know, you've got this combination of pictures and script. You can't let you can't let the script get in the way of the pictures. You're always going to lose out. Remember old Nigel used to tell us about a competition between an eye and an ear? The ear is always going to lose. So you got to use those pictures. So I know watch Adrienne and Paul, especially those two, who when they're sitting in an edit suite, they're doing that once they come back from the field. They're looking at all their material before they start writing. They know with their producer and editor what they want to use. And then they decide on how they're going to write it. And when they have the luxury of the time to do that, it's so critical, especially in television. You can lose an audience in a heartbeat if you've got a conflict between the sound and the picture. So writing as part of storytelling, understanding that there's a difference between the mediums, all of which we try to be involved in. It's a critical aspect of all this. How are we doing on time, boss? Okay. Unless any of you have a final thought, we're going to wrap this up.
Just answering
Diana?
questions is way harder than asking them.
Yeah. No, they've given me 6 different end times here in the last 2 minutes. Just kidding. I know what a kind of a problem we are creating for them in the control room. But listen, what we were hoping to achieve here tonight, and I know we've just started it in many ways, is to try and peel back the mystery a little bit about what our journalists do when they're confronted with the decision to cover a certain story. How do they go about it? How does it affect them? And what does that impact of the effect have on the way they do the story and on their own lives? You know, I know in my time out in the field, just like for many of them, you're impacted by what you see a great deal. Not only how you do the next story, but in your own personal life and the way you conduct yourself. So it's a fascinating profession, and for those young people who want to get into it, boy, you're picking the right one. Work hard, and you will get ahead. Thanks so much. For those here in the atrium, we're going to stick around and answer your questions on a one-by-one basis. For all of us, thanks for watching. down to talk to you if there's anybody who wants to talk to us. We'll be moving around inside the